So Jenny Ramirez is a business leader, a mental health advocate, women's empowerment activist, and blogger. And she is an adventurous soul who loves and enjoys exploring different cultures and connecting with women from different walks of life during her free time. And she's the founder, if I'm not mistaken, of She Alpha Company. So do check her out on Instagram as well. And the book you've recommended, which is fabulous, which is Elizabeth Lesser's Cassandra Speaks. And Elizabeth Lesser is the co-founder of the Omega Institute, which is a very, very major institute in the US, educational institute, and the author of many, many best-selling books. I think one of them is The Broken Open, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And she's already been named by Oprah Winfrey as like one of the top 100, was it super souls? So I'm like, that says it all, really. And so, yeah, so thank you so much for bringing this book to the table, because, yeah, such an important book. So what were your key takeaways, would you say?
Let me just start by saying I love her books as well. This is actually our second read with Elizabeth Lesser. We had the pleasure of interviewing her, and she's such a wonderful soul. It's not just her books, but it's really the mind behind the books. I will tell you the key takeaways from this book is really looking at women's stories differently, looking for those stories, seeking the journey, and also being open to different perspectives, not just seeing your own.
Definitely, definitely. And it was so interesting because when I put the post out there that of this book, someone mentioned a really important fact is that, just the fact that we don't hear these voices whilst we're growing up. We always see the sort of the negative elements. And I'm currently actually reading a book that might speak to you as well, which is Dangerous Women. And yeah. And there is a story about Eve, and this kind of this constant negative narrative of gender. And so I was just wondering your thoughts on, like, why do you think these stories, like telling these stories, is actually important?
If I recall correctly, one of the things that the author mentioned is that stories endure. So far away, when we are both gone, the stories are still going to be there. And those kind of stories are really what impact our generations to come. And it changes the way that cultures see perspective. And I think for me, it's really important too, because imagine being somebody that doesn't have those possibilities. When you see those stories inspire you to want to do more. But if I look around and I see that, all a woman is supposed to be is a housewife, for example, then I don't have other stories to inspire me, to show me that there is a different way. So I think stories really create options for women.
Yeah, no, that's so true, isn't it? Oh gosh, yeah. And there's so many places in the world where exactly you don't have more than that narrative, that one narrative. So absolutely, so true. And I love the stories that she'd mentioned, which is I'm a huge fan of like classics and things like like Pandora's Box, and obviously reading about that. And it's true, we have such a sort of different view of these stories, which is a very negative sort of side of it. And she says, like, Eve and Pandora brought life to the world, but they're often kind of associated with death and sort of hopelessness. And it actually does say that Pandora brought hope as well. So why do you think they've actually changed these narratives?
I think that's a really interesting question, but I do believe that everyone's perspective is a little bit different. And I'll tell you, just from reading and research of what I've read from Adam and Eve, I can share that to me, the context of death actually resembles a new beginning. Because when you look at it, even when they are speaking in the context within hope, in this case, they're going through a phoenix phase. Death is not actually an ending, rather it's a new beginning for them. It's a restart.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. There's a sort of because obviously, like, for example, in Hindu mythology, like, it's very common, reincarnation is very like a common thread. So, but I think in a lot of sort of Western ideology, it's seen as quite a negative, like, it's the end, the end. There isn't this idea of rebirth, although, obviously you have the sort of Christian sort of aspects of rebirth. But
Yeah.
it's quite interesting that, you know, there is this just sort of negative aspect of, you know, this idea. And so actually, and it's strange though, why do you think there's like so many sort of moral doctrines that have so much sort of misogyny like embedded into it?
Think about it. It's one of those things that we just weren't taught any different. When we look
Yeah.
at the moral doctrine, and if we're talking about the distinction between what's right or wrong to what it means to be a woman, I mean, to speak up as a woman, to have your own wants and needs, to be financially independent, and then be completely judged for it. Nobody really knows with certainty. I mean, let's talk about it. Nobody really knows with certainty, right? But I do believe that as a society, we are really hesitant to change how we are looking at women right now. And we really do truly believe that women don't believe in places where decisions are being made, but that is changing. And that's not a new
Mm.
perspective, that's an old perspective. But where does that come from? That comes from all the stories that were told in the past. That comes from everything that we've been taught culturally, from tradition to tradition, and now we're here. So the only way that we
Mm.
change those views is by adapting new ones.
100%. It's so interesting because I've been part of the UN Women's Commission for the last 2 weeks, and one of the sessions they talked about was storytelling, and the importance of storytelling, no matter what the story, like every single story was important. And, you know, it was just like bringing it to the table and understanding why it could be important. So, you know, it was just, it coincided so well with reading the book as well. So I was just like, that's so true. Sometimes we just forget that this small thing that might have happened might not be that important to me, but it might be for someone else.
And we
Um,
at the generations, right? Because whatever action or little action we do or don't do, it's going to impact long term. Maybe not right now, but it will in the next 10 generations and so forth.
mm, totally, totally. And we have oral traditions. So, you know, definitely we kind of hope those stories will be told in the future. And now we've got even more ways of like sort of documenting these stories. So, you know, hopefully it will be there at some point. And lots of people are self-publishing these days, which is great. So, you know, we got more stories. Yeah. And so, okay, so why do you think there are such sort of binary attitudes towards women, anyways?
I mentioned earlier that the importance of story was really because it's the way that it kind of shaped our perspective. And if you look at it, back in the days, there weren't any women in power.
Mm,
Women were thought out as leaders, and more than that, men had it all. Women didn't have it all. We were just part of the equation. And now that's changing. Now we're seeing a major change. I mean, in America, for example, look at Kamala Harris and her supportive
mm,
husband. Look at our new prominent judge
yeah,
that might be assigned to Supreme Court, right?
yeah, it's
These are
exciting.
possibilities that we didn't have back then. And the truth is that I think people are just having a really hard time, one, adapting their views and seeing women differently. The only
Hmm.
difference is that now it's undeniable. Women are serving in different ways, and they're all over in all different industries.
Yeah, no, exactly, totally. It's just it's so amazing watching that whole sort of Katanji, you know, Brown speaking about her, you know, experiences, you know, despite obviously the awful people asking questions, but you know, just absolutely amazing to see such a shift and seeing her such proud daughter and husband sitting behind her. It's just such a beautiful thing to watch. Yeah, exciting. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Really hoping, yeah, really hoping this happens. So yeah, and I read about this Galatea's pedestal. So how do you think we get off this Galatea's pedestal? Do you want to explain what that is?
It's really interesting topic, really, and we kind of went back on this because it is one of the topics for our book club as well. But think about it this way: Galatea was created in the image of a man, right? She was
Mm,
created in the image of somebody and what perfection and what beauty looked like to that particular person. And I think that the only way to get off Galatea's pedestal in this case would be to really take a deep look within and understand that we've been conformed to follow society's norms of what beauty is, what the
Yeah,
norm standard is. And so we go above and beyond to fit within that mold. In order for
yeah,
us to get off that pedestal, we really need to redefine what is beauty and what's acceptable
100%.
in society, because if not, we're just adapting to somebody else's norm and standard of what beauty is and how we need to look in order to be accepted, in order to be loved. And that's just not the case. But I am seeing a big change. I'm going to tell you, and I think this goes across nations. I think more women are standing up to saying, you know what? No, this is not okay. We're redefining beauty. Look at Victoria's Secret, for example. I know it's a big,
Mm,
but their campaigns have changed and shifted a little bit more because women are just not going to be okay with the way that we've been defining that beauty and saying, oh, this is the standard. This is how we're all supposed to look. No, we're all.
yeah, 100%. I'm hoping that actually this kind of feeds through into like technology as well, because I find like still the algorithms have a lot of catching up to do, because a lot of these industries are defined by male standards. So, and you have a lot of men in these industries creating these algorithms. So, I think there has to be a lot of change from the top down in that sort of instance, so that, for example, certain things like effects and things like that aren't defined basically by Western beauty standards.
Mhm.
Um, so it's there's a lot of unpacking to do, but I feel like you're right. We're hopefully heading in the right direction. So yeah, and yeah, so again, such a great book, but it's true. And one of the things it shows is that women in literature are always reduced to weakness, or like always like kind of on the fainting couch. And how do we change this? Because most of obviously the greatest books, always in the top 100 greatest books, are collated and written by men.
Mhm.
And I was just reading like that chapter on this book, for example, where it said it was really interesting, which it tells the story of Eve, all these female characters written in the sort of form of Eve. So, this whole kind of fallen woman, virgin whore. So even the really famous characters like Tess of the D'Urbervilles, is written like a fallen woman. And so I was just like, how do we change these sort of characters, and how do stop them from either being seen as like some kind of sinful or weak?
Mhm. Mhm. And somebody mentioned here that Robin Hood had to pretend to be just to be made a writer. And I definitely agree with that. But the simple answer to this is really women need to write more stories. If we look at how different it was back then and the way the stories were told about women compared to how we're doing it now. And I mean, take Elizabeth Lesser's book as an example.
Mm, yeah,
The fact that we are in a different generation where we actually get to question those stories of how those ideas were shaped, of how these stories are being told, it makes a huge difference because now we're no longer accepting the fact that, hey, these stories were told about us and we're just going to lay down and accept it and say, you know what? Hey, let it be told. No, now we're saying, hey, let's change the narrative. Let's change the story. If women write more stories, now we're talking about looking at the things that make us unique and looking at them as strengths. For example, compassion. It's not
yeah.
a lot of leaders lead with, but a lot of women do. And because they do, they're very successful in all different kinds of power. So I think when women start speaking up more and being more open to delivering their stories, delivering their journeys, that also opens a paveway for other women to come through and say, you know what, I'm ready to share my story because I know this is going to open up the door, one, for more conversation and for us to be able to change how we actually see women in the future.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right in terms of compassion and empathy, which has always been seen in some kind of negative light in the past, where there was just sort of like emotions were equated with weakness, and I feel like there has been a shift in terms of sort of more compassionate leadership in that way. So that's a really, really positive strength. Yeah, I'm just reading some of the comments below as well, which is a definitely there's a stigma in female fantasy writers. Yeah, by men, you're right. There that unfortunately there are some industries that are still sort of struggling. I can also think of like the video gaming industry is also another area which really struggles with writing good characters, female characters, and allowing also women in the industry to actually sort of participate. So for sure, there's still like areas where there needs a little bit of work for sure. And okay, so I remember sending this to you, which is who has power in society, do you feel? And would women's power look different to the usual narratives associated with power, which was such a fascinating concept because power is always seen as like a masculine
Mhm.
struggle with like warlike metaphors and imagery. But power can be seen in so many different ways. So what do you think? What do you think it will look like?
I think this is a really interesting question. And the reason why I say that it's Elizabeth Lesser did mention something about power in the book as well. And the truth is that we have to be very cautious as how we do power. But to your specific question, it does currently seem like the power balance is a little bit off, right? Right now, we have more men leading in power, making those
Mm,
hard decisions on what happens and what doesn't happen within our society. But I do genuinely believe that if there is more women in leadership, we would lead differently. There would definitely be more
mm.
compassion, more understanding of, bringing us together rather than dividing us so much. And those are attributes that currently are seen as weak. But I think that if we change that narrative, it'll be a lot stronger for women.
Yeah, no, I agree. Definitely. I think it's really strange. You're right, because she went through like a list of like really famous sort of male writers on power. Obviously, things like Lao Tzu with The Art of War, then also Machiavelli, The Prince, and these are really quite very extreme warlike examples, and it's true. It's just kind of always associated power with some kind of war essentially. And so yeah, it was really interesting to see that like trying to find a different definition of power. I think that probably needs to be a big change in the sort of in society as well, because it's still not quite there yet, I would say, in terms of this definition. Um, so yes, and okay, and so the other aspect is egocentrism. Do you think egocentrism is genderless?
Uh, I really love this question, by the way. I think this is a great question. Um, After reading the book, I started to look at things a little bit different. There's a specific quote from Elizabeth Lesser, and she talks about how egocentrism is not an outside job, it's an inside job. And I think that the reason why she says that, if we break it down, everybody is born with certain core beliefs in the way that we're raised, right? But with those beliefs, it is up to us, the individual, to really seek within and be open to seek perspective. Because
Hmm.
what happens is if we only do things our way, and if we only want to see the world in our way, and then we get into positions of power, then we get positions into leadership. Now we're wanting to shape the world in our own way from our own peripheral view. And that just can't be. So, yes, I do believe it's genderless, because both men and women can be just as egocentric. But it's
Hmm.
really about making our perspective be open so that our egos are also in the works, are in the process of being more open.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. I've always thought that anyone can have ego because it's part of the human condition, I think. So yeah, definitely. And so when she said that, I was like, yeah, I agree with that as well. So yeah, I've seen women have these like major egos as well. So it's definitely not like defined just as one gender for sure. And also, I remember. So she talks a lot about shadow work, which I'm like I'd come across the concept before, but probably this was like the first time I was properly reading a bit more about it, and how sort of I think it was Freud's kind of aspect of it. And it's like, do we all have shadow bags, which is essentially like carrying this very dark side of us that we don't, especially like women who have to kind of hide it a lot,
Mm.
because you have to conform to a certain behavior and standard. So do you think we all have these kind of shadow bags that we carry around?
Oh my God, absolutely. Absolutely. And I say that for me personally too. Um, and I think it's really hard to admit that. And I will say that it's really hard to admit that, but the truth is that we all do. We all carry around these shadow bags because of the expectations of what we are supposed to be, what we're not supposed to be. And let's not confuse this, okay? This is not to say that this is who you're going to become, but
Mm,
those expectations and views that you have on yourself, but you also have on society of what makes you. Because we go around thinking that we're supposed to be a certain type of individual because of what we've been told.
yeah.
So our whole
Mm,
life, we're trying to live up to that expectation. But the reality is, at some point, we realize this is not who we need to be. But we absolutely do carry those bags around. And I think it takes time for us to get that out of our heads and say, okay, no, I'm
mm.
okay and comfortable with being who I want to be.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. And also, I find that the more you push it down, the more it comes out in different ways and probably more toxic ways. Because you don't seem to deal with those issues, so the sort of the dark aspects of your nature. So that's why I thought that was really interesting because it's the yeah, when you write women a certain way, or if you put women in a certain way, you basically take away their sort of their agency and their voice in being, well, just being human, which is like having these dark sides of your personality and stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just being human, isn't it? So I thought that was really interesting, this shadow work that she brought up, because it, again, you don't usually read it in kind of aspects of especially like feminist work and gender-based literature. And so that I found that really interesting that she'd actually brought that up as like it's okay to have the dark side. So I was like, yes.
This is, and then I'll add here, this is actually one of the things that she talks about also in her other book. I don't know if you've had a chance to read Broken Open, but these shadow bags, these are the same exact things that create those limiting beliefs within your mind.
Mm,
We're talking specifically about women. It's what creates those limiting beliefs within women because it kind of keeps us trapped to the idea that we can't be anything else because this is what we're supposed to be.
yeah. No, you're right. Yeah, actually, well, obviously, I need to read the other book too, because yeah, that's very much the truth, and yeah, it's a vicious cycle, isn't it? If you don't deal with those limiting beliefs, then you end up having more limiting beliefs. So yeah, and yeah, and also she also mentions the idea of having really diverse opinions around you. And
Mhm.
do you think it's important to know people who are really diverse, who have diverse opinions from you, even though you don't necessarily agree with their viewpoint? And it can be hard, especially, we're both women of color. And so, it can be really hard to listen to like someone who has a very different opinion to you, and comes from, say, a privileged background to you, to have a certain kind of opinion. So what was your thoughts on that?
I think, yeah. I mean, you have to absolutely be open to the idea that there's people, especially from different places of the world, that are going to have different perspectives from you. And a lot of people are very strong in their convictions. And I say this because I've traveled around the world for, I don't know, the past couple of years, and I really seek to be more understanding and look at it as an explorer. Like I'm
Mm,
here to observe, I'm here to really understand. And the truth is that that brings more peace in the world by us actually trying to see other perspectives and being open to the idea that not all of us are going to be the same. Not all
mm,
of us are have the same thought processes, and that is okay. And it's all because we come from different parts of the world as well.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because I have those moments of rage where basically, just being at that meeting for the last 2 weeks at the UN Commission, and you know, this was it's completely like women's commission based on climate change, and there were certain federations who basically limited women's roles to the family, and there was just pure rage coming from here. So for God's sake,
They really
um,
volunteer to support, and I know exactly how you feel. It's but it's one of those things where if we don't show our presence, if we're not there to speak up and speak out for all of these other women that are going through these in other parts of the world, nothing changes.
yeah, no, you're right. So sometimes we have to bring it back a bit, and just so that we can be at the table to hear the conversation, I think. Yeah. Oh God, yeah, there were definitely moments in the last 2 weeks where I was just like, right. Now, okay. So this was an interesting quote she wrote, which was about the power of love or the love of power. Now, what do you think is more important? Power of love or the love of power?
It's an easy answer for me, and I'm gonna say it's gonna definitely be the power of love.
Mm,
But the reason why I genuinely believe that it's because love brings about healing and understanding. You can't do that with power. Power is all
mm,
conditioning. It's like saying I only show you or display you my love if you show me this,
mm.
and that's power.
Yeah,
Love
that's true.
unconditional. There's no doesn't have to be an understanding why I love you. It can just be expressed. So, and I think that that's the hardest concept, that it's really hard for a lot of people to understand, but once you get it, you get it.
Yeah, no, no, you're right, because I felt the same. I was like, love isn't about you, it's
Hmm.
about other people, whilst love of power is all about you. So I was like, those are basically two ends of a spectrum, essentially. That's kind of how I saw it as well, which is you can't really have one if you want the other. But yeah, so such a fascinating book to choose. And so really, really appreciate you like bringing this book here. And so what would you give your rating out of 5 stars? What would you give this book?
I definitely say a 5 star. It really got,
Oh,
yeah, it got my wheels turning. It was very well written, and do I wish the story were a little bit longer? Maybe, maybe. But in general, I think it really brought about understanding where we stand right now, having a general concept of what has transpired through the years and really seeing it from a point of view. I really enjoyed that she started with the Eve story and then worked us through the Pandora, and then kind of just like opened that gap on, are we even questioning these stories? And if not,
mm,
why not? Why aren't we questioning these stories? Why aren't we looking at where these stories are coming from? And I think that that's the part that really stays in your head, and you begin to wonder, I have read so many stories, but have I really?
yeah. So true, so true. Like, I just discovered a story of Lilith today that I hadn't
Uh,
even heard of. Yeah, and I was just like, wait, what? And they said that some obscure sort of Jewish text has the story of Lilith, who was supposedly the first wife of Adam,
mhm.
and but she was written in a way that was just cast out evil woman because she didn't like fall for his ways and didn't want to live with Adam and didn't want to have this relationship with Adam. So I was just like, wait, what? And
Uh-huh.
there's just like, and that's a really another important aspect is that we don't have an archive of women's stories like the way we have with history. We don't have her story that much. So I think, yeah, maybe we need to start collecting for the next lot of generations, so
I
we
def-
don't get erased again.
I definitely agree. I mean, because how else are we gonna know, right? And they always say there's always two sides to every story, but who's validating for her story, for her journey, and how she saw things evolve in her eyes. And I think that that's the really important part about stories. We really need to start looking at it in a different way. Who was it written?
Yeah.
Why was it written this way? And is there anything on her part that I can really see understanding as to why it was in this way? So I love Elizabeth Lesser's books. I think it's a great place to start for anybody that's on their journey of discovering stories and then take it from there.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for joining me, Jenny. I like really appreciate it and bringing this ta a story to the table because absolutely brilliant book idea as well. And yeah, really huge thanks for spending some time with me to talk about it. So yeah.
Thank you